Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. Division previews continue. 2 left to go, and it's all about heading west, my friends, with the AFC West on the docket for today's show. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, this feels like this should be a quick show. We make a case for Kansas City to go out there and win their 3rd straight Lombardi trophy, and we close the book on this show about 9 minutes in.
That was supposed to be the plan after last season. We said it in our preview, and we didn't stick to it.
Well,
here we are.
The league apparently didn't heed your warning. You said if Kansas City can win the Super Bowl this year, we may as well shut it all down. And lo and behold, we still have a 17-game regular season schedule in front of us and a chance for Kansas City to accomplish a bit of history. But more on the Chiefs a little bit later in the program. I want to remind all of our listeners, 6 previews already done. Encourage you guys and girls to go out there, listen to all of them. A lot of actionable information as we wrap up the NFL preseason this weekend and get a little bit of a respite before we head into the regular season, kicking off in earnest with those aforementioned Chiefs at home against the Ravens. But as we've done for all the divisions, it's all about alphabetical order, and last I checked, D would be the first letter in the alphabet in this division. So it means we start with the new-look Denver Broncos, whose win total has taken a little bit of over money in the market, number right around 5.5. They still are long shots to make the postseason at a price north of 8-1 if you believe that they can do the unthinkable and dethrone the Kansas City Chiefs atop the AFC West, 20-1, the going rate on investment. And of course, when we look at Denver, some of their additions this offseason, Josh Reynolds comes in to help fortify the receiving room, John Franklin Myers, Will Lutz, Brandon Jones, and Zach Wilson fighting for that third string spot, but most notably, Bo Nix, who they drafted, who was named the starter earlier this week. Garner, Jerry Jeudy, Russell Wilson, Josie Jewell, Lloyd Cushenberry, and Justin Simmons. This, Payne, is a Broncos team seeking its first playoff appearance since 2015. It's actually the longest playoff drought following a Super Bowl win all time. Second longest drought in the league behind only the New York Jets. The Broncos will also be eating the most dead cap space of any team in the league, with a majority of that going towards Russell Wilson, but the luxury afforded when you have a rookie quarterback is you can figure some things out on the fly, and Denver will look to improve on an offense that averaged 21 points per game and less than 300 yards per game, both the fewest in any season of Sean Payton's head coaching career. So what do? They let Sean Payton name his successor, and in quarterback Bo Nix, who they think can be a Drew Brees clone.
That's the hope, yeah?
That's what they tell me. High floor, potentially low ceiling guy to take the Broncos out of the Russell Wilson era.
You know, you mentioned Russ, and I thought last year was pretty interesting because stats like touchdowns and interceptions and completion rate paint Russell Wilson's season in a far better light than it really was. Behind the scenes, we know, right? Sean Payton grew pretty frustrated with how Russ was running his offense, and then it eventually led to that sideline blow-up for the world to see in Detroit, which is pretty ugly. But at that point, the relationship was severed. And you kind of see some of Payton's issues with Russ on the field, right? It was like the refusal to get the ball out quickly, not stressing the middle or the intermediate parts of the field. And you look at Russ, he held onto the ball forever last year, was a really slow processor and decision maker, 3.1 seconds to throw, 40th slowest release time out of 45 qualifying quarterbacks. That led to 45 sacks. And so you also look at Wilson's spray chart. This was wild as I dug this up yesterday. Attempted 20 total throws between the hashes further than 5 yards all season. So the intermediate part of the field, Russ just wouldn't attack. Out of those same 45 qualifying quarterbacks, Russ threw between 10 and 19 yards just 14% of the time. That was 44th most. So he did a very good job kind of skewing some of the surface level stuff, but once you can dive in to see what he was trying to do, it was like, oh my God, this guy's trying to cheat the system here. And it was, you could see why Sean Payton wanted to strangle the guy. I think regardless of how you project Bo Nix at the NFL level, and you mentioned, the high floor, low ceiling, and certainly I think that has to do with maybe some of the downfield ability that hasn't always been there for Bo Nix, so it does limit the ceiling. But you look at Bo, very quick release, his ability to operate the quick straight offense, and then the accuracy to the short and intermediate windows that allow for a lot of the run after the catch stuff is what appeals to Sean Payton. And I think, to your point, has Payton thinking about Bo Nix as a faster, more athletic version of Drew Brees at age 24. And you follow this story, right? I mean, I was, as we do these previews, right? I just go in order of the way we do them, right? And the Broncos all my notes were already basically written up. And so, like yesterday, when it was like, oh, Bo Nix is going to start week 1, I mean, that was pretty inevitable, right?
You didn't think Zach Wilson was going to come from off the pace and win the job?
Well, they're trying to talk up Stidham, but I guess where I'm going with this is, like, the Broncos held a private workout with Bo Nix prior to the draft process. And apparently after 16 throws in that private session, Sean Payton looks over to the GM, George Patton, was like, that's our guy. Unfortunately, you look at this, like, Bo Nix and Sean Payton aren't going to be able to kind of ease into this transition. The Broncos are projected to face one of the 5 toughest schedules of pass defenses this season, one of the 5 toughest schedules of pass rushing defenses as well. So, you'd like a little bit of an easier time there. But again, I just, the personalities match here. The strengths of Bo Nix are exactly how Sean Payton wants to run his offense, so it's pretty appealing from that perspective. And some of those short throws that we kind of, talked about at Oregon last year, they're constantly put on the right shoulder, right? They're constantly put in the right position for an receiver to operate. What surrounds Bo Nix in Denver is actually, to me, solid, considering the team picked 12th in the draft, right? I mean, offensive line finished top 10 in both run and pass block win rate last season. You have Bowles, who just continues to be a premium left tackle. Quinn Miners took a massive step forward. There's probably another level for McGlinchey to reach this season as well. I think, you mentioned one of the guys leaving in Lloyd Cushenberry. That's probably the question up front at center. You have Luke Wattenberg and Alex Forsyth battling for that job at center. Receiver room probably doesn't have a true number 1, but Cortland Sutton is solid, provides a big target for a young quarterback at 6'4". He's got a wingspan in the 85th percentile, and you start to look at some of his attributes for a guy that large, and we know, the knee history there. He's pretty agile, and he's got really good body control. So Sutton's a nice option to have, and then hopefully the healthy version of Tim Patrick emerges, and he can return to the 2020 and 2021 form. It was good watching.
Yeah, him and Bo had a little bit of chemistry working, at least so far in the preseason, in terms of the big target in the middle of the field.
And that's where I was going to go, is you watch the preseason, right? There's no knee brace on, which is nice, right? He's not running tentatively after the Achilles injury. So, I mean, that's a guy who, is a little bit of an efficiency monster that we thought after 2020 and 2021 would kind of take that next step, and then he blows out his knee and then the Achilles. So it's good to see him out there looking healthy. And then obviously Sean Payton, added the speedster. Marvin Mims last year moved up to go get him. So he's a nice change up to Sutton and Patrick, right? He's fast, he's quick. He's been talked about as the breakout player on this offense. And then you alluded to bringing in Josh Reynolds as that solid vet. Who provided some value to Detroit's offense last season. And again, right, another big receiver at 6'3". So you're stacking up, 6'4" Cortland Sutton, 6'4" Tim Patrick, and 6'3" Josh Reynolds, just providing nice catch radiuses for Bo Nix. Running back room has depth and versatility. Javonte Williams is 23 months removed from tearing his ACL, PCL, and LCL. He's young. The efficiency was candidly terrible last season, and I thought he returned a little quicker than he probably should have, but Javonte finished 62nd out of 72 qualifiers in yards created. his ability to force a missed tackle cut in half from 32% to 16%, just a 30% success rate behind a really good Broncos offensive line. So we need to see more improvement from Williams. What's interesting, though, is to this point, Javante's held off McLaughlin, right? Who, Jaleel was extremely efficient last season, the inverse of Javante. Jaleel was third in yards created, far more explosive. So it'll be interesting to see that dynamic. And then you have the rookie, Audric Estime, who's going to be RB3, and he's a bruising back. So I kind of look at this like if Williams doesn't show better, then you at least have that nice 1-2 punch with McLaughlin and Estime, who have these diverse skill sets to provide different elements for this Broncos offense. So, you think about Sean Payton, you think about Bo Nix being a guy that we were super high on, if you remember, right out of high school. And then he kind of like fell back a little bit, and then we were super high on him at the end. He's just a perfect scheme fit. Now, there's going to be some mistakes. Eventually defenses are going to figure some things out, right? He's probably not going to be able to, hit the deep ball as much as you would like, but it's a good scheme fit. It's certainly an upgrade from, a Jarrett Stidham or Russell Wilson, the way he was playing last year. Again, a very good offensive line. The weapons are a little bit better than you would think. And so this offense has some potential despite the very tough schedule.
You mentioned Bo Nix, and I think the primary things that you're looking for out of a young quarterback leading Sean Payton's offense, stay on schedule, which Russ had a knack for not doing last year. Get the ball out quickly. You highlighted how long Russell Wilson liked to sit with the ball in his hands and either take sacks or do dumb shit and avoid negative plays. So I think Bo Nix, given his maturity and his advanced age, sometimes can be a deterrent when you're drafting a quarterback out of college, but may be the perfect fit for Sean Payton as they go through a bit of a transitional period there on the offensive side.
And I think that's a fun, conversation to have, and we don't need to go too deep into it, but we gauge these players and talk about them from a GM perspective, right? You're trying to hit ceilings and you're trying to, find guys that are going to provide longevity and hit multiple contracts. For us, when we talk about these players, it's very much in the moment, in the now for this season specifically. And the other element that Bo Nix has going for him is the mobility, right, which creates a nice floor for a rookie quarterback.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Fan bases are looking for different things than we are as for bettors, trying to assess the evaluations of these guys and what they'll bring to the table. Now, defensively, Payne, Vance Joseph's unit showed market improvement as the year progressed. They had a knack for creating turnovers, which led to a little bit of a midseason turnaround. They just weren't able to overcome an offense that oftentimes lacked a lot of punch. The problem for this defense is that they allowed 10 or more rushing yards to running backs at one of the league's highest rates. They didn't exactly generate pressure consistently. And when you look at what they tried to do to fortify the roster, it's not like they were able to go out and land an elite pass rusher to try and improve this particular group. So while there may be optimism about the offense raising its floor, consider me skeptical in terms of what I can expect from this defense under Vance Joseph's leadership.
Well, I think you laid that out perfectly in that there was some improvement as the season went on. If you looked at the first 6 weeks last year, Denver was fighting to be the worst defense in the history of the league from a schedule-adjusted efficiency perspective. And then some of the young guys improved, players adjusted to Vance's scheme, and then Vance understood his players' strengths and weaknesses better and made some of those adjustments and put the players in better positions. So from Week 7 onward, the Broncos defense finished 12th in EPA per play allowed, and that was without the aid of turnovers, which Denver feasted on during that 5-game win streak there in the middle of the season where they're beating teams that were certainly superior to them. You could see that there was like material improvement. Even early downs saw a tick up from 31st the first 6 weeks, 24th from Week 7 onward. If you're following camp reports, the Broncos defense showed extremely well last week against the Packers and joint practices. Remove what you saw from the actual game itself. I mean, the Packers basically treated like, the camps and the practices like the game, and they just got the fuck out of Dodge.
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out, Payne, why the Packers just didn't forfeit that game, because I've never seen a team trying to figure out its backup quarterback situation, and other than a couple of deep throws that Sean Clifford made on the opening series, it was check down, it was run, it was, all right, you thought they were playing in 30 inches of snow, and Matt LaFleur couldn't get on the team playing fast enough.
Yeah, that's basically what that was. But in those, the information I got from the joint practices was, surprisingly a Packers offense that we think pretty highly of. struggled. And Denver's front was extremely disruptive all week in those joint practices. Now, I don't expect this to be an elite defense, to your point, but I think overarching improvements have been made, and the Broncos project to play a bottom 5 schedule of offenses this season, so that's nice. Up front is where I think some of the potential questions would be from the outside. It was a bottom 5 a season ago in both pass rush win rate and run stop win rate. Denver was bullied in the trench, dead last in rushing yards allowed before first contact, so that needs to improve. DJ Jones, man, he's been pretty disappointing since coming over from the 49ers and inking that big deal. Below replacement run defender, and his missed tackle rate surged to 24% last season. You mentioned, I think, John Franklin Myers at the top was brought in to help solve the run game issues. He's been a plus run defender for the Jets for 3 straight seasons. He's also been a really nice pressure guy inside, 13.5% pressure rate on pass rush snaps for 4 straight seasons, over 50 pressures last year. And as Denver kind of fights off the Russ salary cap issues, which you mentioned, right? Gobs of dead cap space. Myers is like this very nice Moneyball trade that I thought was going a little bit under the radar. Malcolm Roach comes over from New Orleans after his best season as a pro. Zach Allen was a scheme fit for Vance Joseph. They spent time together in Arizona. He had a fantastic season, 11% pressure rate, set the edge well. And then, if you remember, our guy, Baron Browning, we said would explode once healthy. He did. 14% pressure rate last season, set the edge well for being undersized. He's in a contract year, so keep your eyes on that. Nick Bonito has apparently made quite the leap this year. I thought his sophomore season was surprisingly good. 17% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, just didn't have the full workload. You listen to him in some of his interviews. He's determined to be better against the run. Jonathan Cooper was a plus player last year again. He's also in a contract year. The organization thinks the steal of the entire draft this past April was Jonah Ellis, and he's had a nice rookie camp. So there's far more talent, depth, and upside in Denver's front heading into this season. Also, it helps that a few key cogs are looking to get paid, and money is the motivator. You look at the linebacker position. You got Alex Singleton, Cody Barton, and then Jonas Griffith. That's kind of the trio there battling for those 2 jobs. Singleton and Barton are kind of smart, savvy guys who do a decent job stopping the run and tackling. Both, though, are liabilities in coverage, so we'll see if Jonas Griffith contributes a little bit more as that different style of linebacker, but he's just a little bit more wiry, let's call it. It's a decent linebacker group. Secondary, we know, is led by Patrick Surtain Jr. He's coming off his worst season in his 3 years as a pro, so hopefully he's a little bit more acclimated to Vance's scheme, and there's like a tick up there. If you're following that situation, let's see if the contract gets sorted. There's been some talks of a potential trade if they can't get a deal done. So, I think that would shock people, but maybe kind of put that on the potential plate of possibilities there. Riley Moss looks poised to win the starting corner job there. So that could shock some people. We a white starting cornerback,
Jason Sehorn.
Jason Sehorn, baby. Yeah, he's doing a little fist pump and a smile in the mirror this morning. You listen to Sean Payton talk about Riley, and it's just like, hey, we're kind of surprised by this, because if you remember last year, they're probably going to play him at safety, but they looked at him. It's like, he's smart. The hips are a little bit more fluid than we thought. The length is really good, and then his ability to kind of phase the receivers has been very good in camp. Jaquan McMillan was a pleasant surprise at nickel last season. He was a willing tackler. Brandon Jones, who you mentioned, former Dolphins safety, was signed this offseason, tore his ACL in 2022, rebounded really well late last season. There was just a logjam at safety, but 3.9 yards allowed per target. If you look at Jones' game from Week 12 onward, really showed some health and confidence. If P.J. Locke could combine his 2022 season when he was great in coverage and his 2023 season when he was very good in run support, the Broncos might have something there. And then you got some depth guys, right? Levi Wallace provides some veteran depth. Chris Abrams-Drain's a guy who we really, really like, provides some young upside. He's been good in camp. It's not surprising he was part of that fantastic cornerback duo at Missouri. The schedule of passing offenses is easier this season than last. And so, I think we're projecting Denver's defense to make some strides this season.
One thing I will tell you, if Denver is going to exceed odds makers' expectations and somehow find a way to either flirt with their win total going over or actually do it, they might be well served to actually beat the Raiders for the first time in an eternity, something that they haven't been often able to do, knock off one of their divisional rivals. Now, credit to the Denver Broncos. They were able to get the proverbial monkey off their back, at least for one game last year, against the 800-pound gorilla in the room that is the Kansas City Chiefs. And when we look at the Chiefs' season-long markets, I don't think it'll shock anybody that they have one of the highest win totals in the NFL at 11.5. They are a massive, right around a $5 favorite to make the playoffs. Numbers may be shorter if you do shop around. And the heaviest favorite to win a division of anyone in the league, the only team north of $2 in that particular department. As far as some of the easy for me to say, additions are concerned, Hollywood Brown, most notable on the offensive side. We know they drafted.
You're just flustered that you're celebrating, something regarding Iowa football.
Yeah, look,
Riley Moss starting at corner has got you all
on the
up.
day that their head coach gets suspended for trying to tamper whatever he was doing to recruit a high-profile quarterback like Cade McNamara, Iowa needs something to hang their hat on in that regard. The Chiefs
he must have been spotted together in the glue aisle, putting him back together.
Well, we'll see if Brandon Sullivan, the Northwestern transfer, takes over, but different discussion for a different day that I know will break down Iowa State, unfortunately. Probably over the next couple weeks. Hollywood Brown comes in to try and help in the receiver room. Of course, he may miss a couple of weeks with that sternum injury. Carson Wentz, most likely to serve as the backup to Patrick Mahomes. And change in the punter position. Matt Ariza, the former San Diego State great, comes in, takes over for Tommy Townsend. But there were a lot of exodus on the other side of the ball, and offensively as well, I should say. L'Jarius Sneed, MVS, Blaine Gabbert, Jerick McKinnon, Nick Allegretti along the offensive line, Willie Gay, we talked about, Mike Edwards, and Tommy Townsend. But, this is a Chiefs team, Payne, who I actually don't think we need to split the atom and tell people what they already know. Newsflash, Kansas City is going to be good, and what should be scary for the rest of the league, Kansas City won the Super Bowl last year with metrics that would have had most teams finishing right around 500, which speaks to the greatness of Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and what this team can do offensively, even when they're forced to dink and dunk their way to victory.
Yeah, I'll try to be deliberate, but it probably isn't going to happen. But I think to your point here, there's only varying degrees of good. And there were concerns and even some panic with Casey's offense last season. And I think for good reason, but Mahomes and Reid still finished 8th in schedule-adjusted efficiency. And I think if you're looking at this season, there's probably 3 things to focus on. So the first for me is Kansas City's passing game, right? Veach and Reid knew they needed to help Patrick Mahomes open this offense back up. Now, what we saw, and to your point, is that Mahomes completely changed his game and adjusted to his weapons and adjusted to the changes he saw from defenses and made it work. But Veach was like, hey, we don't want Mahomes playing left-handed, so to speak, anymore. And so basically, went out and got some talent and got some speed. And we know Mahomes can throw it a country mile, but if you look at next-gen stats, they tracked 45 quarterbacks with enough sample size last season. Mahomes was 40th in intended air yards at 6.6, 30th in percentage of deep throws. In the last 18 years, not a single NFL offense threw the ball shorter than the 2023 Chiefs on early downs. And so, it's great that Rashee Rice is coming around and he was effectively learning the offense on the fly, and then Kelsey is kind of eking out the last drops of good football he has, but neither are downfield threats, right? So it's like you look at the pairing, and this just looks really good, right? It's Hollywood Brown on a 1-year deal. 4.2740 at his pro day. You got the rookie Xavier Worthy, right? Record-breaking combine time of 4.21. And so those two will absolutely help Mahomes increase his intended air yards. And that just opens everything up. And you're just thinking about the problems that can create for defenses, because now you have to defend the entire field, right? Not just a phone booth. And then that also means that Rice and Kelsey, who are fantastic underneath, who are great against zone, it's a really interesting four. All right, I look at that and be like, man, this just works together. They complement each other as well. So I think that's probably going to be a positive. And then you think about some of those games, right, where Kansas City doesn't really have the ability to come back because the weapons are so bleak. It's like even in those games where they're trailing now, it's like, man, you feel really good with some downfield threats. I think the other thing that we talked about, and maybe it was in our offseason show, we mentioned Hollywood Brown. I thought KC was buying low based upon what Brown dealt with the first two stops of his career, right? It was a run-first Greg Roman offense with a less accurate Lamar Jackson in his early years. He's certainly more accurate now. And then there were two different offenses in Arizona with Kyler Murray missing nearly half the games Hollywood Brown played in. So if you look at Brown, his inaccurate target rate was 22% in Arizona. It was the highest rate of any receiver in the NFL over the last 2 seasons with at least 200 targets. So when he's back healthy, and I think it's going to be earlier than people believe, that is a massive get. And I just think that improved the Chiefs receiver room overnight. And I think if he can play with the SC joint injury, that's interesting. But the other thing here is, you got the Rice suspension looming. We'll see if...
Who knows if it even happens this year, honestly.
Yeah. I think the hope is, right, that... Yeah, well, first of all, the NFL claims they're still waiting on facts from the Rice case. I think in a perfect world for Reid and Mahomes, Brown's injury and Rice's suspension won't overlap, but we'll see if it does, right? I mean, still waiting for some facts.
You need to get facts before you can hand out the punishment if you're the National Football League.
So... you really have to like what they've done with that receiver room. Offensive line, I think, is the second point of focus here, right? The inside group's elite with Joe Thuney, Creed Humphrey, and Trey Smith, likely the best trio in the NFL. However, and this is kind of what's scary for the rest of the league, Creed and Thuney had their worst season simultaneously in a Chiefs uniform. They were still great, but like a slight tick down from prior seasons. Word is Thuney will be ready to roll week 1 after the pec injury left him out of the Super Bowl last year. The tackle situation was bleak. I mean, Jawan Taylor had his worst season as a pro after getting $60 million guaranteed. I hated the signing, but understood the Chiefs were desperate for tackle help. But Taylor allowed a 6.5% pressure rate on pass block snaps, 59 total pressures allowed, 12 QB hits. The positive is this. It would be nearly impossible for Jawan Taylor to play worse this season.
You're telling me there's a chance.
Right. And so at left tackle, it was thought to be Wanye Morris's job, but the worst kept secret was the Chiefs' love for Kingsley out of BYU. And there were rumors that Veach wanted Kingsley in the first round, but got him at pick 63. And before Morris was even sidelined with the shoulder injury in camp, he'd been getting reps at guard. So Kingsley will be the Chiefs' starting left tackle day 1, unless something surprising unfolds. Far better in pass protection than run blocking at BYU. And then through the small sample size of preseason, he showed better as well. You go back to BYU, 3% pressure rate for his career allowed. He's got really strong hands. And then for tackles, you look at Kingsley's wingspan, right? 80th percentile. Arm length, 90th percentile. So he's tough to get around at 6'5" with those measurables. And I think the bar for Kingsley isn't overly high either, right? Like, I was wrong about Donovan Smith last season. I believe he finished 59th out of 85 qualifying tackles and pass blocking efficiency, right? I mean, 32 teams, 2 tackles a team. Like, he was in the bottom level of starters. The Chiefs just couldn't squeeze plus production out of him last year. So where I'm going with this is, like, on paper, the tackle position is a question, but when you project ahead, like, Jawan Taylor can't be worse. The bar is super low for Kingsley to exceed. And then it's probably unlikely that Thuney and Creed have their worst seasons in a Chiefs uniform simultaneously again. So I'm kind of buying the offensive line here as well. So that's to me what's scary about what this offense can be in Kansas City. The third element you have to love if you're a Chiefs fan or you're making a case to back KC in the betting market is the schedule works in concert with the improvements that I've mentioned, right? We're projecting an uptick with Kansas City's pass game. An offensive line that probably is flat or takes a slight tick up barring health. So it's extremely helpful that Reid and Mahomes face a schedule of defenses that are below average in totality this season. That's outside the top 20 and passing defense. So, again, I think that meshes really well when you think about the newly acquired speed that's going to force defenses to defend every blade of grass, which should also help the Chiefs' run game. And quietly, like everyone's talked about concerns of the pass game, you look at the rushing game, that just hasn't been there like it had been early on in Mahomes' career. 26th in rushing success rate the Chiefs were last year, 20th in run block win rate. Less defenders in the box, coupled with a schedule of run defenses that blends outside the top 20 when you factor in both down-to-down and explosiveness. And I think you probably see an uptick in Kansas City's ground game here as well. So unless health becomes an issue, I believe the Chiefs get back to being one of those top 3 offenses in the league. And Todd, I think that's actually important, right? Because the offenses will need to prove this year. I think maybe the defense takes a slight step
Well, that's
back.
what I was going to say. Scary when you think about all the stock arrows pointing up for this Chiefs offense, because last year, while the offense struggled, the defense was able to bridge that gap a bit. By the way, before we get into the Chiefs defense, a minor NFL trade Payne just unfolding. Philadelphia acquiring Jahad Dotson from division rival Washington Commanders in exchange for some draft picks. So we'll see if Dotson can give Philadelphia that third wide receiver opposite Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown that they've so needed to help our division future. And, of course, Jalen Hurts' prospects to compete with Patrick Mahomes for MVP. Defensively, Steve Spagnuolo led a defense that was second in the league in points per game allowed and yards per game and sacks. I mean, they were outstanding across the board. They do need to show a little bit of improvement in their run defense, but as we know, Kansas City is more than happy to let you run on them when they're playing with the lead. Chris Jones and the defensive line should be stout. You like a lot of the pieces that are there, but to your point, there are some concerns when you lose one of your lockdown corners in L'Jarius Sneed. The linebacking core takes a bit of a hit, but look, this defense doesn't have to be elite if the offense is able to scratch the surface of all of its potential.
I'm thinking about it a touch differently, maybe. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a defensive dip. I think the question is how large. And in credit to Kansas City, because they don't win a Super Bowl without Spags in this unit last year. They really picked up the slack. And honestly, you go back to our preview last year, that wasn't a surprise to us. We called for defensive improvement. We got it. The Chiefs finished 7th in schedule-adjusted efficiency. They were 4th against the pass, and those numbers were really true because the Chiefs didn't benefit from gobs of turnover luck. It was actually the inverse, bottom 10 defense in turnover EPA. So the down-to-down stuff was as true as could be. There's more questions this season in my mind along the defensive line than maybe even you.
Well, Charles Omenihu's a big loss, too, that I think it's a signing that you highlighted that most people weren't talking about last year, and he clearly paid dividends. So losing him definitely hurts.
Yeah, recovering from that torn ACL. The target date I'm hearing is a November return. Derek Nandi hasn't been the player he was in 2018, 19, and 2020. He's actually been dreadful, but he's still a projected starter battling a nagging injury, so we'll have to keep our eyes on that. There's been some internal conversations about Veach adding another defensive lineman. We'll see how he chooses to handle this, but for the time being, it's basically Chris Jones, George Karlaftis, and Mike Dana up front. We know what Chris Jones is, right? Elite pressure guy inside. Dana has a high floor to his game, but not an elite measurables or traits guy. So what the verbiage that's used within that organization is he kills for his food, so to speak. 8 sacks on 8% pressure rate takes some real work. And then Karlaftis, took his game to another level, 14% pressure rate on pass rush snaps with 11 sacks. He improved as an edge setter. Despite taking on more snaps, so that was good to see. Also, the missed tackle rate went from 32% Karlaftis' rookie season to 12% in year 2, but it's kind of that next trio of guys that need to step up, right? Felix, the kid from Kansas State, and then Wharton and Pennell. So that will be interesting to see what the depth looks like. I get the vibe another guy may be added here at some point. I don't know if it'll happen before the season, but we'll see what transpires there. The linebacker group, to me, is really strong. I know Willie Gay left in free agency, and he's this athletic specimen, but candidly, it was the organization's choice. Veach and the coaching staff prefer their other 2 young backers in Bolton and Chanel. Bolton is the green dot when he's healthy, has an all-around game. They're making a concerted effort to try to get him on the books moving forward and figure that contract situation out. Bolton's a great communicator. He's smart, good run defender and tackler, not a liability in coverage, even though it's not his strength. Leo Chanel has a real chance to be good. He doubled his snaps last season, single-digit missed tackle rate, elite against the run, tacked on an 11% pressure rate. And then Drew Tranquill was one of the better under-the-radar signings last season, just a professional in every sense of the word. When Bolton went down with injury, Tranquill took over the green dot role. He can get washed in the run game some, but he's a solid tackler, very good pressure guy from the linebacker spot, 6.6 yards per target allowed in coverage. So it's a very nice trio Spags has at linebacker. Each has a strength, but none a massive weakness. The secondary, to your point, is dealing with significant change. L'Jarius Sneed is gone. The Chiefs wanted to keep him at a certain price, but fully understood, right? As a fourth-round pick, Sneed was entitled to get his first real paycheck. 5 yards per target allowed and a 55 passer rating, physical, long, traveled. So Sneed's going to be missed. The other change here comes with Trent McDuffie. He's primarily played in the slot, and he's being moved outside, although he's going to do some traveling. But those two in the same secondary are tough because Sneed and McDuffie are so physical. Like they want to beat up receivers. And it was a tough tandem to get loose from. The guy everyone pegged as the replacement for Sneed was Joshua Williams. Played 420 snaps last year, 3.6 per target allowed, which is pretty nuts. The final 200 snaps last season, Joshua Williams allowed 3 catches on 15 targets for 30 yards. Corner number 2 was supposed to be Williams' job. He was supposed to run away with it. Dealing with a hamstring tweak. Did not run away with the job even when he was healthy. Najee Johnson was, running with the ones recently, 7th round picked, missed last season with an injury. Now he's dealing with a hamstring injury of his own. Chamari Connor had a fantastic rookie season, kind of filling in for Brian Cook after his leg injury at safety. But now, like Spags is thinking about Connor in the slot. Brian Cook is back at safety. All signs are that he has no lingering effects from the injury, and he's had a fantastic camp. Justin Reid is the running mate there. Reid needs a bounce-back season. Was far better in 2022. So for me, the secondary here is a little bit of a wait and see. The loss of Sneed could be, a downgrade to 2 positions here, right? Because Trent McDuffie might not be as good outside. So that's downgrade number 1. And now you're moving McDuffie out of the slot from where he was elite and hoping a safety can replicate his performance. So that could be the second downgrade. And then Williams and Johnson need to get healthy. But I will say this, you trust Spags to get more than the sum of the parts out of this unit. I also trust Veach again to not only tinker maybe up front with personnel, but it wouldn't shock me if a veteran defensive back gets added. Guys like Xavier Howard and Adoree Jackson are still looking for work. Xavier Howard certainly has trended downwards a little bit, but maybe he's a little bit healthier. He likes to get up in your face and play that press man, so it's a little bit of a scheme fit there. One thing we don't talk about often, Todd, is special teams. And there's been some issues with snaps and coverages on kickoffs, but
yeah, you lose your long snapper. Credit to Noah Gray stepping in a preseason game, raising his level of play last week.
But maybe the help here defensively to where the tail off might not be as large as one. If the offense is better, now all of a sudden the defenses you're facing are the offenses you have to face are a little bit more predictable, right? If your offense is scoring points, now all of a sudden we kind of know what the opposing offense has to do, and that'll help the Chiefs' defense. But also, you signed the punt god, who is just like booming balls into another stratosphere. So it's very possible that there's going to be a little bit better field position for the Chiefs' defense this season as well. So that's something to potentially think about in terms of like how we're going to gauge this dip. But ultimately, I do think we see a little bit of a step back here for the Chiefs defense.
Kicker-punter combo, not an area where the Chiefs are at all deficient. You mentioned bringing in Matt Araiza, who gets his second chance, and then, of course, the extension that they offer up to Harrison Butker as well to try and solidify that particular position. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. For all things Bet the Board related, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, 2 other teams in the division to cover, and I think that's where things start to get, well, for one of the teams a little bit more interesting, one maybe not so much. And it starts here in my backyard with the Las Vegas Raiders, who made news over the weekend, electing to go with Gardner Minshew as their Week 1 starting quarterback. This was a Raiders win total that was 7 this offseason. We've seen it tick down to 6.5, shaded to the over. Long shots to make the playoffs right now at a price tag of 3-1 or greater. And again, when you look at their division prices, right around double digits, 8-9-1 on the low end for a team that has a first-year head coach in Antonio Pierce. And when we talk about the additions, Gardner Minshew was one of them. They fortified their defensive line a little bit, bringing in a player that you know pretty well in Christian Wilkins from Miami. Alexander Madison in the backfield to split time with Zamir White. Harrison Bryant to help out a little bit in that tight end room. Drafted, of course, Brock Bowers there to pair with another player in Michael Mayer, because apparently that's what the Raiders are doing, just stockpiling tight ends. And parted ways with Jimmy Garoppolo, Josh Jacobs, Amik Robertson, Austin Hooper, and Jermaine Illuminor along the offensive line. Payne, this was an interesting team last year because they were so bad early on it killed our win total, because if they were a little bit better, Jimmy G might have retained his starting job. Josh McDaniels might not have been fired, and we'd have been sitting pretty with some of the best numbers that were out there. They were able to get hot late in the season under Antonio Pierce, never really had to play from behind. But when you dig into some of their numbers, I mean, the best scoring defense in the league after Pierce took over from weeks 9 to 18, a lot of that had to do with just playing keep away and a little bit of bully ball. Luke Getsy comes in as the offensive coordinator and is tasked with overhauling a group that finished 27th in offensive points scored, 27th in total yards gained and yards per play, outside the top 20 in total offensive EPA. I mean, there were a lot of things this Raiders team did well, but there were a lot more they did poorly, and there's no reason to believe that this offense is going to be any more dynamic with Luke Getsy at the helm calling plays this season.
One of the luckiest seasons in the history of the sport. I'm a little surprised the football guys were so happy and enamored with Antonio Pierce. They gave him a season from the gods.
All that good karma he built up for his time at Arizona State on Herm Edwards' staff.
Yeah. My mind's going there now. That was quite the scene there out at Arizona State. I think that's probably the best place to start, right? There's a glaring difference with how Antonio Pierce is viewed among Raider fans and mainstream media versus sports bettors. And you give Pierce credit, right? He kind of brought a jolt of energy last season, and the players went from hating their leader and Josh McDaniels on a personal level to loving Antonio Pierce, and that changed the team's on-field effort. It was very clear to see guys flying around. They cared more. But, Antonio Pierce isn't some schematic genius, right? His philosophy is outdated by multiple decades, and he was one of the worst coaches making plus EV in-game decisions. And so I think there's this belief that all of the rah-rah stuff doesn't have longevity. And then you kind of look at what he brought in offensively, and these are hires that he directly made. It's like Luke Getsy, right? And then named Gardner Minshew as starter. That is a bottom-of-the-barrel offensive coordinator-quarterback combination, right?
You apparently have not seen the workout videos of Gardner Minshew shirtless, jumping over pylons with his mullet this offseason. So the fact you're going to sell Gardner Minshew short, Payne, that's a black mark on your resume.
I love that. Very, very attractive for Armenian women, I'm sure. All right. Yeah. This has gone off the rails, but this is.
It's the AFC West. It's the Raiders. If we're going to go off the rails, we may as well do it with this team.
You can kind of see how Pierce got to the Getsy hire. I mean, Chicago passed the ball at the 27th highest rate in neutral situations, and the Raiders, once Pierce took over last season, passed it at the 28th highest rate in neutral situations. So very run heavy in neutral situations, and I'm sure that was a welcome sign there for Pierce. But as a defensive minded coach, right, and you look at Antonio Pierce's offensive mindset, it's to play conservative, right? It's to play mistake-free football, and ultimately, I think the pick six last weekend against Dallas sealed O'Connell's fate in that QB battle. You mentioned, as we talked a little bit prior to the show, maybe the mobility was a little bit of a plus factor as well. But specific to Getsy, like the very first time he installed an offense was in Chicago. That was the first time he did it on his own. And it looked very disorganized at times. The plays didn't necessarily marry one another often enough, and it was a bottom 10 offense back-to-back seasons and schedule-adjusted efficiency. And, where this potentially gets weird for me is, like, the best part of the Raiders team by a long mile are the pass catchers, right? Davante Adams, Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, Trey Tucker has been, like, the unsung hero all camp, and then Michael Mayer. The worst part is the running back group, right? Zamir White was like 48th in yards created among qualifying running backs, right? Alexander Matterson was 35th and just extremely inefficient in some specific areas that were just like, my God, this guy isn't an NFL caliber running back. And so now you have this head coach and OC that want to run. So you're kind of handicapping the best part of your team. Now, I'm interested to see what Bowers and Mayer on the field and two tight end sets together looks like. But that means what? That Tucker's off the field. And again, he's kind of been the guy this camp. Getsy did run 12 personnel at the 8th highest rate in Chicago last season, so you would expect a good amount of that. You expect both those high draft picks on the field at the same time. But keep an eye on Bowers. He's dealing with a little bit of a foot injury after the Cowboys game. I don't think it's anything major, but those tend to be a lingering type injury. And then, Gardner Minshew wins the job for now, but it's like he's been a fine backup in a familiar scheme following Steichen from Philly to Indy, but I think asking him to start and learn a new offense is a little bit of a leap of faith. He was not the most accurate passer among 35 quarterbacks with at least 250 dropbacks last season. Minshew finished 33rd in completion rate over expectation. And then you think about his game in totality, right? Like the long hair, like you just think about him and it's like, hey, he wants to be aggressive, but he's got the pea shooter for an arm. And so, they kind of reeled that in last year with Steichen. That was the best part of how that worked out. It's like, hey, we got to reel this in a little bit, but somehow still had 22 turnover-worthy throws last year, despite being reeled in and having the 30th highest ADOT, which means somehow Minshew put the ball in harm's way without the upside. And, it's just weird that, like, this decision was almost made, right, in terms of him versus O'Connell on, like, one play. And it just feels like such an Antonio Pierce thing because all the conversations for, like, the last couple weeks were like, O'Connell feels like he's performing better in camp. It feels like he's performing better in joint practices. And all of a sudden, like, you just have that one pick six, and it just plays into Pierce's mindset of like, hey, we want to be conservative and can't turn the ball over. And it just, you remove the idea that Minshew's kind of been a little bit of a turnover machine the last few years over the large sample size as opposed to like one play in a preseason game. Offensive line feels middling, but there is some upside. You know what you're getting out of Colton Miller, 3% pressure rate allowed last season, plus run blocker. Andre James had his best season as a pro, and I think the question becomes, is that repeatable, or does he revert back to like the prior 2,000 snaps of play? And then you have Thayer Munford, took a massive step in year 2 as a run blocker, struggles mightily in pass protection, 9% pressure rate allowed.
Raiders don't throw it.
He's 6'6", 320 with a 90th percentile wingspan and arm length, so there is upside there. You lost Greg Van Roten and Jermaine Illuminor, who were signed in free agency other places. 2 of the plus players last season up front. Dylan Parham is moving to right guard. The Raiders plan to run more wide zone concepts this season, and that's Parham's more natural side. Left guard is Jackson Powers Johnson when healthy, or Cody Whitehair filling in if he's not healthy. And so you also look, the Raiders face an above-average schedule of defenses. So I just don't see this working as well as it should with the pass-catching weapons Vegas has. I mean, Davante Adams clearly still has juice. Brock Bowers is a massive get. Jacoby Myers is a nice piece. Again, like there's weapons here. I just don't know if the scheme or the philosophy is going to get them the ball enough. And there's already been some conversations of, if this goes left, how long Davante Adams is around. So that's something to kind of think about when you're looking at some of these futures, right? And we always talk about, why guys gravitate towards unders. It's like right now, Davante Adams is here, and this is how it's viewed. Week 7, he might not be there, right? Week 9, he might not be there. So there's always more ways to win an under than an over.
You mentioned the stuff around Gardner Minshew, and I think even when they announced him as the starter early on, it wasn't like they committed to him for the full season. You wonder if that has a lot to do with the opponents they'll face. You highlighted the mobility. And anyone who watched some of the preseason action for the Raiders, Gardner Minshew may not have thrown interceptions on the stat sheet, but there were plenty of turnover-worthy throws that he had against the Cowboys. It was a glaring error for Aiden O'Connell when he was slow across the middle that may have sealed his fate. O'Connell offers a little bit more upside in terms of his arm strength and higher variance outcomes, so it'll be interesting to see what this Raiders team does and how they perform right out of the gates. Now, defensively for the Raiders, Payne, I mean, this was a group that finished the year into the 9th best scoring defense, giving up 19.5 points per game. They snapped the longest drought in NFL history without a scoring defense ranking in the top half of the NFL, a streak for the Silver and Black that had spanned 20 seasons. Mentioned how good the scoring defense got when Antonio Pierce took over. A lot of that had to do with an offensive philosophy that was more about limiting mistakes, playing keep away, and feeling comfortable punting and pinning. If you're trying to find a strength of this team, you look, there are a number of difference makers up front. I mean, Christian Wilkins comes over, and he did a tremendous job in terms of accumulating numbers, both on the pass rush and in stopping the run game as a member of the Dolphins. 355 career tackles, leads all NFL defensive linemen since he came into the league. Max Crosby, an absolute force off the edge. You understand why his odds are as short as they are to be Defensive Player of the Year. We'll see what the Raiders can get out of Tyree Wilson. Malcolm Kuntz, pressure rate was there. The sack numbers weren't. But when you begin to look at this Raiders defense, we know Antonio Pierce wants to play old school throwback football. He at least has some players in the front seven that can check those boxes. Is a little bit more left to be desired when we're talking about the Raiders, especially on the back end.
Listen, I mean, defense takes energy and effort. And, you know, we've probably had some not great things to say about Antonio Pierce that'll piss some Raiders fans off or those in the media. But kudos to him for fixing this side of the ball. He gets full credit for the defensive improvement. First 8 weeks, early downs over 3 quarters, the Raiders' defense was 24th in EPA per play allowed. You see Pierce take over week 9, and the Raiders improved to 3rd from that point forward. Now, the improvement was obvious, but there is noise in the numbers. If you look from week 9 onward, the Raiders had the luxury of playing a slew of backup quarterbacks, right? Tommy DeVito and Zach Wilson instead of Aaron Rodgers, and Nick Mullins and not Kirk Cousins. Your boy Easton Stick and not Justin Herbert.
My boy Easton's going to be selling insurance sooner rather than later. We'll get to him in a minute.
He's got enough money to own insurance
Oh,
shop.
it's the Chase Daniel career path, and Chase parlayed that into a booth job calling Mountain West football now, apparently.
I saw that.
Or sorry,
yeah.
Fox. Fox Studio Show, I believe is.
He's been eating good too. Spending all that backup quarterback money there. Gardner Minshew they also played, right? Jarrett Stidham. In totality, 35% of the defensive snaps the Raiders played came against backup quarterbacks last season. 7 backups in 17 games. So that is part of the defensive improvement and why maybe some aren't believing in the full-on improvement of this defense. So, you know, for me, I think there was defensive improvement. I'm still not maybe buying the secondary. That's maybe the point of contention and a good place to start here because of all those backup quarterbacks. Nate Hobbs moving to the slot helped him in a big way, but struggled as a tackler, still allowed 7.2 yards per target and a 103 passer rating last season. The Jack Jones trade was a win for the Raiders, and Jack Jones got to reunite with his high school and college coach Antonio Pierce. He basically was unplayable in New England last season and then struggled his first few games in Vegas, but really came on late last season. And again, like you're wondering, is that real or a byproduct of backup quarterbacks? Trayvon Moehrig, right, had his best season defending the pass and improved against the run. Marcus Epps has been a rotational piece for 3 teams in 5 seasons, not overly consistent. The highs are good. The lows are unplayable. So again, it's like you look at the schedule last year, he wasn't great against decent quarterbacks, and suddenly he was really good against the backups. Jacorian Bennett won the starting corner job, it looks like, gave up 8.4 yards per target as a rookie, 18% missed tackle rate, well below replacement level, but we'll see if there's a year to tick up. Now, you mentioned the front 7. That looks promising, and that should probably help the secondary. the money spent up front has been huge. You mentioned, that duo of Crosby and Wilkins. That's going to be a pretty dynamic twosome there. Crosby, what I appreciated last year, it was a season where he was clearly hampered by a knee injury, and if you kind of understand what he was playing through to even be out on that field, that was the most impressive part. But 15% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, number one among edge rushers and run stop win rate. So Crosby's the full package. Christian Wilkins is a really good interior lineman. He's a worker, good team guy, familiar with the defense as well. If you remember, him and Patrick Graham spent time together with the Dolphins, so picking up the scheme and the terminology is going to be seamless. Wilkins' pressure numbers really increased in a contract year, so you wonder if there'll be a little dip back to reality there. He was 13th in pass rush win rate among interior linemen last year, double-digit sacks for the first time of his career. You mentioned Malcolm Kuntz, came out of nowhere. Third-round pick, played about 100 snaps combined his first 2 seasons. Last year played over 500 snaps. He actually had a better pressure rate than Crosby, if you can believe it. Tyree Wilson, you mentioned, he heads into year 2. 7th overall pick in 2023. I have heard he's been quietly shopped. The Bears, your Chicago Bears there, Todd, have made a call.
Well,
we'll see.
Well, they were bummed they didn't land Matthew Judon, outdone by their former GM and Ryan Pace.
Yeah, so we'll see if something comes to fruition there. But if you look at Tyree Wilson, kind of really struggled as a rookie. Now, I know he battled the foot fracture. I'm just interested to see what this looks like because there were a lot of scouts that laughed at where the Raiders took Tyree, if you remember. There just wasn't a lot of great available options. It was a position of need, so they kind of overdrafted him. He's not like the most fluid or natural bender, and he plays with a high pad level at times. He's not overly quick or explosive. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. At linebacker, it's the same duo, right? Spillane and Diablo for another season. They complement each other pretty well. Spillane is best playing downhill in the ground game and getting after the quarterback. Had an elite season defending the run, added 19 pressures. Diablo is the faster, quicker linebacker, really good tackler, 6% missed tackle rate for his career, over 1,500 snaps. But again, overarching, the schedule of offenses that the Raiders face this season is tougher, right? And it would be a miracle if Vegas had similar injury luck. That was part of last season's anomaly. It was twofold too, right? I mentioned that more than a third of the snaps the Raiders defense had was against backups. But at the same time, the Raiders had the second healthiest defense as well. So I think the quarterback health improves from their opponents. I think maybe their health declines a little bit. There's only one direction to go for that. And then there's still some concerns there in the secondary. I don't see it being the most talented and multiple guys with big questions there trying to defend the pass.
And when you look at the Raiders on paper, trying to do everything they can to continue their ascent and stay the second most relevant team in the AFC West, I think a task that's only going to get more difficult until they find a long-term solution at the quarterback position. If it's Aiden O'Connell, great. Clearly not going to be from day one, so we'll figure out what Antonio Pierce can do. Now with a full offseason to get this group prepared and teams that they'll face a lot more in tune with the kind of defensive philosophies and the offensive mentality that the Raiders will embody. I want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, I did earlier in the show, if you haven't subscribed to the Bet the Board podcast newsletter, you can do that. Links all over. We've tweeted them out. They're on the Bet the Board website. Delivered right to your inbox every Friday throughout the fall. Some additional information that you may have missed throughout the course of the week. Reminders about all the great content we're putting out and additional best bet content to try and help you round out that portfolio throughout the course of the fall. Last, Payne, when we talk AFC West, it's the Los Angeles Chargers. And, of course, the big move the Chargers made this offseason, bringing in national championship winning head coach Jim Harbaugh. He takes over for Brandon Staley. And when we look at the Chargers, their win total 8.5, heavily shaded to the over. They're right around a pick'em to make the playoffs. Most shops you have to lay right around $1.30 to $1.35 on the no. And they are currently second favorites in the division at a price tag offering back more than 3-1. When we look at the changes that the Chargers have made to their roster, bring in some familiar names associated with the Baltimore Ravens that the Harbaugh family knows well, and J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. Try to address some of the wide receiver concerns with DJ Chark, at tight end Will Dissly, Bud Dupree, a situational pass rusher, Kristen Fulton, whose numbers didn't leave anybody brimming with confidence in terms of what he did in coverage, and Bradley Bozeman along the offensive line. But the biggest change is a lot of the familiar faces we've grown accustomed to, especially those in fantasy circles, that won't be there for this Chargers offense. Gone is Austin Eckler, off to the Washington Commanders. Keenan Allen traded to the Chicago Bears. Mike Williams, now a member of the New York Jets. Gerald Everett also to the Chicago Bears. Eric Kendricks and Kenneth Murray gone from the linebacking room. And this is a Chargers team last year who went 0-7 in games decided by 3 points or less. It actually tied for the worst record in NFL history. So you do expect some regression in that particular department. Coach Harbaugh becomes the first college football head coach since Tom Osborne to win the national title and not return the next season. We know what his resume was at Michigan and how he really got this team to fire on all cylinders over his last 3 seasons. When we go back to his time as a bench boss of the San Francisco 49ers, was 44-19-1, the 4th best record in the NFL during that span, provided one of the 2nd best rushing offenses in the league and scoring defenses, best win percentage by a head coach to debut since 1970 in the merger, and he was the only head coach all time to reach the conference championship game in each of his first 3 seasons. The one thing that Harbaugh can hang his hat on, Payne, not only does he have a potential franchise quarterback in Justin Herbert, but this schedule sets up extremely nicely from a opponent strength, even if the rest dates don't work in their favor, for the Chargers to be able to put a little bit of that proverbial hay in the barn, especially before their early season bye.
You mentioned farm animals there. Are there enough cows out west to supply his milk and steak needs? I know you guys out west
little bit
more of a soy milk,
yeah, a little bit further
community.
from the heartland, so you don't have access to the great dairy products you get in Wisconsin. Out west, it is a little bit more of a oat milk, soy milk, pea milk, whatever the hell else we're doing these days. In that particular department. I don't know if that's actually a thing.
The green variety or the yellow?
I now have to Google it. I said that. I should have thought about pea protein, and so pea milk dawned on me. I don't know if it's actually a thing, so I'll have to poke around a little bit.
I think that joke.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
We've run along on a division that I didn't think we were going to take this much time on. This is pacing to be the longest division we've done.
It's 12:10 Eastern Standard Time, so I'm not drunk yet, but I'm probably going to need to be after discussing the freaking Raiders in Antonio.
A couple of Bloody Marys and mimosas go a long way in South Beach.
I'm not a Bloody Mary guy. Gives me a little indica.
Tito's and a little Clamato goes a long way.
So I think probably not many will agree with this because you're either on one side of the Justin Herbert fence or the other, but I think I kind of feel for what Justin Herbert's had to deal with the past few seasons. 2 finger fractures last season. The one to his throwing hand finally took him out. And then you think about what surrounded Herbert last season, aside from Keenan Allen, was pretty terrible. And then you think about the resources that were spent along the offensive line. It didn't really translate. The group was below average in both run block and pass block win rate. And then, Austin Eckler. Poor guy looked like he was running with lead cleats last year.
He's washed. He won't tell you he's washed. I'm convinced he's washed.
51st in yards created, and then Mike Williams tore his ACL in week 3. Quentin Johnson wasn't ready to contribute as a rookie. Forget the drops, right, in the stone hands. 129th in route win rate. Johnston won his route against the closest man in coverage just 34% of the time, 0.8 yards per route run. So, and you think about with all the opportunity in the world, it was a scary bad season for Johnston. So you look at Justin Herbert, finished top 5 among qualifying quarterbacks and lost EPA due to drops. And so I feel for the guy. I think if you fast forward to this season, even though it's new, it's really straightforward. I think everyone knows what's coming, right? You knew what Harbaugh wanted at Michigan. The success he had doing it his way is only going to lead to him continuing to do it that way. So he goes out and he hires Greg Roman to be his offensive coordinator. They were the combination in San Francisco. I believe it was from 2011 to 2014. So it paints a very clear picture of what the Chargers offense wants to be. And then you look at the personnel, right? Draft a lineman, sign a tight end and 2 running backs. The Chargers want to be a physical run team with an elite quarterback, and that style will certainly put pressure on Herbert to win in high leverage situations. A lot of third down stuff that's going to need to be converted when you get to the red zone, right? There's going to be some high leverage situations that Justin Herbert's going to have to win to get this team over the top to play with that kind of style in 2024. Greg Roman's final season in Baltimore, if you look, the Ravens' pass rate over expectation was bottom 10 in the league. When the offense did get aggressive, it was through play action, and Greg Roman had Lamar throw with play action at the third, second, and highest rates the last 3 seasons of his tenure for the Ravens. Word I was getting was that obviously he's not Lamar, but Greg Roman wanted to use Justin Herbert's legs more this season, but now he's just getting out of a walking boot, and he's dealing with plantar fascia. And I understand the camp report from yesterday was glowing, but those plans probably get a little bit nixed. And then you think about running from under center some. It's going to put more stress on Justin Herbert. So this foot injury very much sounds like a pain tolerance thing for the early portion of the season, but it also has the potential to flare up at any point. So this would be, based on our ratings, the largest drop-off based upon what Easton Stick has been to this juncture.
Ryan Tannehill, line 2, let's go.
Yeah, that could be a possibility. Offensive line, to your point, you kind of hinted at it. It has gobs of talent, right? And they're being taught a different mindset. But you look, Joe Alt, 5th pick. Rashawn Slater, 13th pick. Zion Johnson, 17th pick. Trey Pipkins is going to slide inside to right guard, and then you have Bradley Bozeman, who was signed in free agency to reunite with Greg Roman after spending 3 years together in Baltimore. He knows the offense, right? He's the anchor of the offensive line. He's going to help those other guys around him. Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins appear to be the 2 lead backs, 2 guys that Roman is familiar with from Baltimore. Gus Edwards is really interesting because he doesn't really provide any value as a pass catcher, and he prefers running over you than around you. Dobbins has apparently looked good in camp.
You hope this kid has a chance to stay healthy just once.
The chances of reaching his peak, I think, are all but
Agreed.
gone, right? You look at the right leg, it's a mess if you go down this history of a fractured fibula in 2016, ACL, LCL, meniscus tear in 2021, Achilles tear last season. It's all to the right side of the leg. So, he's played 9 games in 3 seasons, rather. Then you have the college fan favorite, right? Kamani Vidal. He was actually on the outside looking in for a roster spot, but then this past week, 11 carries, 49 yards. Harbaugh spoke glowingly of him, and he kind of leapfrogged to the RB3 role. So it looks like he may actually be on the 53-man roster. We'll have to keep our eyes on that.
Yeah,
but the other positive,
figure he has a chance over Isaiah Spiller, who's never really realized his potential as an NFL back.
Yep. And then this is kind of the one potential bright spot is the Chargers project to face a bottom 10 schedule of run defenses. So there's a path, right, for the Chargers offense that's going to align with their new identity, which you like. The pass catching group to this point doesn't have a true number one that we know of. The staff absolutely loves Ladd McConkey. If you asked me 3 years ago, is Ladd McConkey going to be like a number 1 wide receiver in the NFL, we all probably would have laughed at you. But he is an elite route runner. He is Justin Herbert's favorite target in camp. Now, he's only had one 500-yard season at Georgia, and he battled some injuries there, so you don't know, but he is going to be, it sounds like, the lead receiver. Joshua Palmer's still around, high-floor guy. DJ Chark was having an impressive camp, but injured his hip flexor this week. The reports were it could be serious, so we'll have to monitor that because he's the deep threat, or was the planned deep threat. Will Dissly was the big offensive free agent signing. He is in-line blocking tight end. So, again, just like another piece of information to the puzzle on what this is going to look like. But overarching, right, with the talent up front, Justin Herbert, right, Harbaugh's pedigree, this will eventually get figured out. In the very short term, I'm a little bit more concerned for obvious reasons, right? Justin Herbert is battling a foot injury, and we're already talking about pain tolerance that can flare up at any time. That's not really what you want to hear heading into a season from, your franchise quarterback. Running back group isn't overly dynamic. Receiver group doesn't have, a true number one, but there is some upside there with first-round guys. But, I think if you're gauging it right now on paper from what we know, probably like a bottom 5 to 7 receiver group in the league. offensive line is being asked to play a style that's polar opposite of what it was asked to do the past few seasons. And on top of that, the Chargers play a slate of defenses this season that overall projects to be top 10. So if the running schedule is easy, what does that mean? The passing schedule is very difficult. So, and we know passing wins games more frequently. So it's I'm interested to see what this looks like. Let's put it that way. I think there's potential, again, long-term for this to be very much figured out. And, there's a lot of money spent, a lot of draft capital spent along that offensive line. You have a great quarterback. So those are all very much positives. I'm just intrigued to see what it looks like year one.
I know there were plenty of fantasy guys out there clamoring for the Chargers to use that top 10 overall pick and go after a player like Malik Neighbors, similar to what the Cincinnati Bengals did when they were building weapons around Joe Burrow. The Chargers electing to go a different path, and we see that's paid dividends for the Detroit Lions. Penei Sewell, a franchise cornerstone. I think the Chargers believe they have that in the Notre Dame product along their offensive line with some of the other draft capital that you mentioned that they've used there. From a defensive coordinator standpoint, a familiar face for college football fans takes over for Coach Harbaugh. It's Jesse Minter. Minter ran a 2-4-5 defense, so to speak, at Michigan. We'll see if that's how he elects to try and attack in the NFL. A little bit different in that regard, but he's got a lot of low-hanging fruit here when you're talking about a Chargers defense that was 24th in scoring a season ago, 28th in total defense. I mean, defensive ranks under Brandon Staley were 28th or worse in his 2+ seasons as head coach. They spent the second most amount of cash on the defensive side over the last 2 years, and they didn't exactly get the ROI that they're looking for outside the top 25 in a lot of the key metrics that you would use to gauge the effectiveness of a defense. But if this group, Payne, is going to scratch the surface of improvement, they need Joey Bosa healthier. Hasn't been the case, already trending in a poor direction on that side of the ball. He's missed some time at camp for undisclosed reasons so far. Khalil Mack, we thought he was a little bit washed up himself, put together a tremendous season last year when you look at his pressure rate generated and how he was able to compile sacks. Defensive line going to look different, though, and this team will need to solidify its defensive backfield and get a little bit more out of its tandem of former Florida State Seminoles, Asante Samuel and Derwin James Jr.
I just got a text from Billy. Howie is the GOAT, he says. Must be seeing the Dotson trade.
The Dotson deal from the Commanders?
Yeah. He was kind of falling out of favor there.
Yeah, for whatever reason,
offense,
it just didn't look like it gelled. You thought he was going to get better and started to trend poorly last year.
So you mentioned Jesse Minter, new Chargers DC, follows Harbaugh from Michigan, spent time with other brother John in Baltimore. He's buddies with new Seahawks coach Mike McDonald, and those two share a very similar vision with defensive concepts in our year 2024, and they're very much in lockstep with the Fangio scheme, right? It's less blitz-centric, less cover one, more cover three, more disguise and coverages with post-snap rotations, right? Vision drops, eyes on the quarterback, and far less like match concepts because of all the mobile quarterbacks that we see now in the NFL. So that's kind of what you are expecting here for Minter's defense with the Chargers. It feels like the players in the Chargers defensive front will deal with slightly more change than the back end based upon that. Right off the bat, I think a huge positive for Minter and the players in this defense overall is like during this transition, like the Chargers are projected to face a bottom 3 schedule of offenses. It's the largest dip in projected competition for a defense year over year. And so there's still gobs of high-end talent, some of which you mentioned. Khalil Mack turned back the clock last season. I mean, that guy was a freaking menace, and he did it without Joey Bosa for half the season, which was all the more impressive. Finished with a 17% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, 18 sacks. Mack destroyed tackles in the run game and had a single-digit missed tackle rate. I thought there was a case to be made for him to win MVP defensively. Joey Bosa has to get his body right. Only 500 snaps the last 2 seasons, even when he's been out there, just a 12% pressure rate. So if Minter can get Bosa back to his 2019, 2020, 2021 form, look out. Tooley, I thought, had a very nice rookie season. Now, he's more of a 3-4 end than a 4-3, so I'm interested to see that transition. But Minter is a good enough defensive mind. Tooley is uber talented. They'll make that work. The floor is high because Tooley can really set the edge. Bud Dupree was signed as a veteran edge guy. Bigger name than production, but good depth piece. Inside is where my concerns are, right? It's Otito, it's Morgan Fox, it's Poona Ford. All three are desperately looking for bounce backs. I mean, the play from that trio hasn't been good, quite frankly, for the last 2 seasons each as individuals. So you're hoping for something from those 3 guys, or there is a real problem inside for this defense. Linebacker group is completely revamped. Outer Eric Kendricks and Kenneth Murray. Brought in the veteran Denzel Perriman. He's still an elite thumper. Can't spell coverage. But,
dude's 107. You got to cut him some slack, Payne.
You have Dan Hanley. He was a 3rd-round pick last season, only played 50 snaps. He actually started camp as the 4th linebacker in the rotation, but Henley has arguably had the best camp of any Chargers player, and he is actually set to start right now. Michigan man Junior Colson was cleared from injury about 3 weeks ago. He's flashed since he's returned, so stock arrow up on the Chargers linebacker group relative to what our projections were 3-4 weeks ago. My mindset's a little bit different with this group right now. Secondary, as you pointed out, it has some horses, but it has some holes. Your hope is that a little bit of a different scheme, a different voice, help improve a unit that finished 26th in EPA per dropback allowed and gave up gobs of explosives. You mentioned Asante Samuel Jr. He was the bright spot, 13 havoc plays created through the air. Derwin James is in store for a bounce-back season. I can tell you he is quite confident and loves the new scheme. And when you see Minter blitz, he likes to send heat from the slot. So
he's got to be licking his chops over there.
Yeah. He is... looking forward to this season, let's put it that way. Gilman had a career year last year. I don't think it's repeatable, but fantastic all-around season, plus run defender, improved his yards per target allowed by 7.4 yards year over year. The other 2 spots are question marks for me, right? Christian Fulton comes over from Tennessee. His 4 seasons in the league have ranged from replacement level to unplayable. He's been a liability in both coverage and as a run defender. Fulton allowed 11.3 yards per target last season, was 193rd out of 200 qualifying corners. And then you have Jasir Taylor, appears to be starting in the slot. He lost his starting job towards the end of last season, 24% missed tackle rate. I have extreme confidence in the defensive staff. I love the schedule situation from an opponent perspective. The rest disadvantage does scare me. And again, defense, right? Energy, effort, fatigue, those all play a role. And while there are elite top-end players on this defense, there are holes, right? I mean, interior of the defensive line, that has to be better. And then the question marks at the 2 spots in the secondary, along with some depth questions as well.
It's an interesting team, and I'm curious to see what kind of ground Coach Harbaugh can make up in the first season. He clearly had his choice of picking NFL jobs over the last couple of years. Wanted to take care of some unfinished business, got that knocked out at Michigan, and decided he wanted to partner up with essentially a franchise quarterback in Justin Herbert, who I think a lot of people have sold short. I know Peyton Manning putting him in his top 5 when that list circulated either earlier this week or late last surprised some folks. But when you're played for as many offensive coordinators, this can be a quarterback-friendly system when you can lean on a heavy ground game, get the building blocks going in front of you, and you mentioned all the injuries that Justin Herbert's dealt with, from broken cartilage to broken fingers to inconsistency. It is now officially time for him with that lucrative contract to go out there and realize some of his potential. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Follow me there for all things podcast related. Follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Payne, best bet, 6 divisions down, 2 to go. Anything catch your eye for the AFC West?
So you had kind of sent me a few ideas last week, and I had some time to look at them, and it very much meshed with some of the overarching thoughts of specific teams, quarterbacks, units. This is a player prop. It's available at DK. Let's go Michael Pittman under 87.5 receptions. Now, I would have preferred this, a couple days ago, right? I mean, obviously at this point, it looks like Downs could miss a week or 2. It looks like Jelani Woods is going to miss some time with his toe injury. But when you look at Richardson and Pittman playing together for 3 games last season, it was 13 receptions on 22 targets. And you extrapolate that out over 17 games, which insinuates Pittman plays all 17, takes you to about 74 catches. Jonathan Taylor is at full health. He's going to be ramping up. He's been the star of camp thus far. But why that's important to note is the Colts' pass rate was higher earlier in the season when those target and reception numbers we're using to extrapolate, right? And Jonathan Taylor wasn't there. They became a little bit more run-heavy late, and obviously game situation presented itself as well because the Colts were down more often with AR in the game. But, there are more pass-catching options with Adonai Mitchell when Downs comes back. Alec Pierce, I mentioned, take the next step. Grayson has been a fine tight end. There's multiple guys in that room that are really good. So, Michael Pittman, under 87.5 receptions. We're also seeing some, there was an article yesterday that came out, and, we mentioned AR's accuracy issues in greater detail if you want to go back and listen to the AFC South preview, but yesterday's camp report was not good. The accuracy was horrific. Candidly, and you can't really base bets on this situation, we are hoping for a healthy Anthony Richardson this season because this probably goes by the wayside if somehow Flacco gets inserted. So we're rooting for Anthony Richardson to be accurate enough.
Run the football
and stay
Run
healthy.
the football, AR-15. Just run the football, hand off to Jonathan Taylor, throw the ball 12 times a game, and everything will work out just the way we drew it up. All right, my friend, 7 previews down, 1 left to go, the NFC West, and then suddenly we are on to actual games in and of themselves. Starting, 2 weeks from today, kickoff between the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs. We can finally put to bed the offseason and start picking apart some of these week 1 numbers.
It certainly doesn't feel like the offseason based upon...
An offseason doesn't exist in this business
all the
anymore.
work we've been doing. Yeah, so, just a little bit of a schedule update as I look at the calendar. Monday the 26th, we got the NFC West, and then, college football, week 1. The trio is back together with me, you, and Brad. That will release sometime on Thursday the 29th. And then, we're here, right? Wednesday, September 4th, college football week 2, and then our first NFL podcast on Thursday the 5th for week 1. So it's here. Football season officially upon us.
The grind is real. There is no doubt about that. Hopefully all of you guys and girls out there that have listened to all of the off-season content, both of the college and the pro variety, have used it to get smarter. You've gotten your bets in at some of the best numbers available and aren't chasing some of that late market steam as we get closer to kickoff for these games. If you haven't already done so too, Brad Powers actually recorded a Week 0 podcast that I wanted to highlight at the top of the show, gave a season preview on Notre Dame, tried to hit on a number of the Week 1 college football games that we won't preview in depth, but spent a lot of time on a couple of the matchups that you'll see this weekend. Payne, I wouldn't be doing my job as a host if I didn't ask you one final question before we close the book here. What do you...
I have no idea if they're going to win or not.
I didn't ask about winning. I just asked what you had on tap for the season opener, because Florida State normally gets your undivided attention, but it will have the undivided attention of the entire college football world on Saturday afternoon, morning out here on the West Coast.
Well, I will certainly be watching it. That's for sure. In terms of the plans, where I'll be watching, I'm not quite sure. We contemplated making that trek over, but the preseason schedule with all these podcasts just simply did not allow it. So yeah, we'll see what comes of this season. It'll be a pretty telling game. I'm interested to see where this line goes from here.
We've seen one-way traffic so far. At 10, we saw a little bit of resistance at the sharper offshore shops.
We have. There was a little effort there to push that thing into a single-digit range. We'll see if sportsbooks oblige.
Talk about one-way action, by the way. Montana State may close a 17-point favorite for their trip to Albuquerque the way this frickin' thing is going.
It's certainly an interesting Week 0 slate. By the way, I was talking to Brad, and I was like, hey, there's not a ton of Week 0 games if you want to, pick out an ancillary game or two for Week 1. Go ahead and talk about it. I see the the podcast come across with his notes. There's 47 games.
I almost fell over.
And while it was great.
I almost fell over when I saw it.
While it was great, you see the response. Everyone's like, oh, why don't we just start another podcast where we talk about every game? Yeah, I would certainly love to hear the opinion from pro bettors on every single game, every single week. Color me shocked. That's what a listener would want. Unfortunately, not in the cards, so I hate to break that to you. But Brad at least gave you a week 0 podcast that is one for the ages.
If one of our listeners out there happens to own a Fortune 500 company and wants to pony up a 7-figure sponsorship agreement, I'm sure we could do a lot of things out there in terms of covering 40-plus college football games every week. But the way things go in the space, we focus on the marquee matchups. We give you guys a little bit of taste of some of that G5 stuff. And if it ain't broke, we have no intentions to fix it. So Brad gives you guys a little bit of an appetizer there, leaving off the big games that, of course, I think everyone knows what we'll cover next Wednesday. So looking forward to it. We will enjoy a weekend that's relatively quiet before the season is here in earnest. So best of luck with all of your preseason action for NFL Week 3, any college football Week 0 investments, but most importantly, with a Michael Pittman receptions prop under the total for the regular season. We'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.